I'm 27F, and I have a younger sister, Maya, 24F. We grew up with a single mom who did her best, but money was always tight, bills were paid late, groceries were a struggle, and anything beyond necessities was a luxury we couldn't afford. By the time I was old enough to work, I was already used to stepping up, taking care of Maya, handling chores, making sure things ran smoothly at home, while mom juggled jobs. College was never a guarantee for either of us, but Maya was the smart one, at least according to everyone. Teachers praised her, family members encouraged her, and mom made it clear that Maya was the one who had a future worth investing in. So, when it came time to decide what to do after high school, it was never really a question. I gave up my shot at college and went straight into work. At first, it was just a retail job, then a second job waitressing. Eventually, I was balancing overnight shifts too, sleeping in short bursts whenever I could. The money I made went straight to Maya, her tuition, books, rent, and even groceries, so she could focus on her studies. I lived as cheaply as possible, eating instant noodles, wearing the same worn-out sneakers for years, skipping doctor's appointments I couldn't afford. Mom saw this as my duty. If I ever hesitated or complained, she reminded me that Maya was going to be the one to make it, the one who could lift us out of poverty. My sacrifice wasn't really a sacrifice, she said. It was an investment in our future. For a while, it seemed like she was right. Maya graduated with honors, top of her class, and landed a high-paying finance job straight out of college. When she called me that day to celebrate, she told me I wouldn't have to struggle anymore, that she would return the favor and help me get my life back on track. That was the moment I let myself believe things would finally get easier. I started looking at community colleges, thinking I could finally take the classes I had put off for years. I even let myself imagine moving into a place of my own. Instead of staying in the cramped apartment I shared with 2 roommates, Maya told me I deserved it, that she would make sure I got the chance I never had before. Then, everything changed. At first, it was small things. She moved into a high-rise apartment in the city, saying she needed a nice place to reflect her new status. When I mentioned repayment, she brushed it off. She was still settling in. Then came the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the expensive dinners. Her social media was filled with pictures of rooftop parties and weekend getaways. While I was still working double shifts to make rent, I brought it up again, more directly this time. She told me to be patient. The final blow came when I sat her down and told her I needed the money back. Not all at once, just in payments. Anything, really. She didn't even hesitate before telling me I was on my own. You did what you had to do as a sister, she said. No one forced you. That was it. Years of sacrifice dismissed like they meant nothing. I walked out of that conversation knowing one thing. Maya was never going to pay me back. She had no intention of helping me. Not now, not ever. I had spent years breaking my back so she could have a future, and the second she got what she wanted, she cut me off like I was disposable. That's when I made my decision. If she thought I was just going to let it go, she was dead wrong. The moment I walked out of that conversation with Maya, I knew exactly what I had to do. She thought she could walk away from years of sacrifice without consequences. She thought I would let it go, like all the other times I had put her first. She was wrong. I went home and opened my laptop. I had kept every receipt, every bank transfer, every text message where she had promised to pay me back. I had records of tuition payments, rent deposits, grocery bills, everything that proved I had financially supported her for years. Maya had always been careful about her image. She liked to tell people she had worked hard to get where she was. But the messages she had sent me over the years told a different story. I'll pay you back as soon as I graduate. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. I promise I'll take care of you like you took care of me. The proof was all there. She had admitted, over and over again, that she owed me. The next step was finding out what legal options I had. I booked an appointment with a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman who took one look at my evidence and told me I had a solid case. With the right approach, I could take Maya to court and force her to pay me back. That alone was satisfying, but then I stumbled on something even better. Maya's wealthy boyfriend, Daniel, was under the impression that she had put herself through college. She had told him some sob story about growing up poor and working 3 jobs to pay her own way. Meanwhile, she had been living off my money, staying in a nice apartment, eating well, and focusing on her studies without ever having to lift a finger. That was when I realized just how deep her lies went. Before making any legal moves, I gave Maya one last chance. I messaged her, laying out everything. I told her I had records of every dollar I had spent on her and gave her a chance to settle things before I took further action. She read the message. Then she blocked my number. That was it. I took my story to Reddit. I didn't use real names, but I detailed everything, how I had sacrificed my future so my sister could succeed, how she had promised to pay me back, and how she had cut me off the moment she got what she wanted. I included screenshots of our conversations, making sure to blur out personal details, but keeping the messages clear enough that there was no mistaking what had happened. The post blew up overnight. Thousands of comments flooded in, calling Maya out for being selfish, entitled, and ungrateful. People from our hometown and even some of her college friends saw it and started sharing their own stories. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she had used. Then, it got even worse for her. Her coworkers saw the post, and so did Daniel. I got a message from an unknown number the next day. It was Daniel. He wanted proof. So I sent him everything. The messages, the bank transfers, the receipts, he got it all. Within hours, Maya was calling me from another number, screaming about how I had ruined her life. I ignored it. This was just the beginning. Daniel confronted her and it didn't go well. From what I heard, she tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. He wasn't buying it. She had been hinting at an engagement, but now Daniel was pulling away, questioning everything she had ever told him. Then, Maya tried a new approach. She reached out with a half-hearted apology and a lowball offer, hoping I would drop the issue. She offered me a few $1,000s, barely a fraction of what she owed me, and tried to guilt-trip me into letting it go. I rejected it immediately. Full repayment, or I was taking her to court. Meanwhile, the public fallout wasn't slowing down. People from all parts of her life were finding out the truth. Former classmates, co-workers, even distant relatives, everyone was talking about it. Maya had built her entire image around being a self-made woman. Now, people knew the truth. The final step? Legal action. I had my lawyer draft and serve Maya with legal papers demanding repayment. She had ignored me when I asked nicely. Now she had no choice but to face the consequences. The battle had officially begun. Things started unraveling for Maya almost immediately after she was served with the legal papers. The fallout from my viral Reddit post was still growing, and it had made its way into every corner of her life. At work, people were talking. The whispers started small, hushed conversations when she walked past, sideways glances in meetings. Then, someone sent the Reddit post to the office group chat. That was when things really went south. Her coworkers started asking questions. Some of them had known her during college and had believed the story she told about putting herself through school. Now, they were finding out the truth, that she had lived comfortably while I had been the one struggling to make ends meet. It didn't take long for HR to step in. Someone forwarded the post to them, and soon Maya was sitting in a closed-door meeting with her boss. It wasn't about the lawsuit itself. Her job didn't care about her personal debts, but her credibility was shot. She had built her entire career on being hardworking, responsible, and independent. Now her coworkers were questioning everything she had ever said. Meanwhile, things weren't looking good in her personal life either. Daniel's family got wind of the drama, and they weren't happy. They had already been hesitant about Maya because she wasn't from a wealthy background, but now they thought she was a liar and a gold digger. His parents sat him down and told him to rethink everything. They warned him that a woman who would manipulate her own sister wouldn't hesitate to do the same to him. He hadn't even processed all of it yet when I sent him more proof. Every bank transfer, every bill I had covered, every message where Maya had promised to pay me back. After that, Daniel was done. Maya's meltdown started with an angry text. She blamed me for ruining her life over something as small as money. As if years of sacrifice and financial struggle were nothing. As if she had the right to turn her back on me the second she didn't need me anymore. I ignored the message. My lawyer had already filed the lawsuit, and the court date was set. Then came the career hit. Maya had been in line for a promotion, a big one. But after the HR meeting and all the office gossip, it didn't happen. They passed her over for someone else. That was when Daniel officially ended things. No more engagement talk, no more weekend trips together, no more shared future. He packed his things and left, refusing to take her calls. That's when the sobbing calls started. The same person who had blocked me just days ago was now desperate to talk. She called over and over again, but I didn't answer. The damage was done, and it was all her own doing. Our mother tried next. She showed up at my apartment, angry, frustrated, telling me to let it go. According to her, Maya had already suffered enough. She lost her boyfriend, her promotion, her social standing. Wasn't that punishment enough? I stood my ground. Family doesn't use each other as stepping stones. Maya didn't stop there. She started telling anyone who would listen that the money had been a gift. She tried to twist the story, painting me as greedy and bitter. Unfortunately for her, my lawyer was already ahead of her. The bank transfers, the messages, even the casual texts where she had admitted to repaying me, there was no way for her to argue that it was a gift. Her last supporters, mutual friends, old classmates, started pulling away. No one wanted to be associated with her after seeing how easily she could betray the person who had given up everything for her. Maya tried to delay the court date, scrambling for a way out. My lawyer shut that down immediately. There was no running from this. Realizing she was out of options, she made a last-ditch attempt at settling. She reached out through a mutual friend, offering to pay me back in small amounts, but only a fraction of what she owed. I refused. Full repayment, legal fees included. No negotiations. Maya had backed herself into a corner. She had spent years climbing up using my sacrifices as her ladder. Now the foundation was gone, and she had nowhere left to run. The court date arrived faster than expected. I walked into the courthouse prepared. My lawyer had gone over every detail, every piece of evidence, making sure there were no loopholes Maya could exploit. Maya was already there, sitting stiffly in one of the chairs outside the courtroom. She looked rough, dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily tied back, dressed in something that was meant to look put together, but clearly wasn't. It was a far cry from the polished, confident woman she had pretended to be just weeks ago. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he was used to handling small contract disputes and not personal lawsuits like this, was flipping through papers. He barely glanced at me as I walked in. Inside the courtroom, it didn't take long for Maya to start her act. She tried to paint me as some bitter, jealous sister who was only suing her out of spite. She claimed I had no real hardship, that I had supported her willingly, and was only coming after her now, because I was resentful of her success. My lawyer let her talk. Then, when it was our turn, she calmly laid everything out. Bank transfers, every single payment I had made for Maya's tuition, Rent, groceries, screenshots, texts where Maya had acknowledged the debt, promising to pay me back. Witness statements, friends who had known the truth and were ready to back me up. Then came the final blow. A video. It was a short clip from a family gathering years ago. Maya, laughing, telling our relatives how she couldn't have made it through college without me, talking about how she would repay me someday. She had been bragging, back then, trying to make herself look grateful. But now, it was undeniable proof that she had always known she owed me. The judge barely looked at Maya as she tried to come up with an excuse. Her lawyer scrambled, trying to claim that the money had been a gift, but the records told a different story. Every payment, every deposit documented. The texts alone were enough to shut down that argument, but the bank statements sealed it. The ruling was clear. Maya was ordered to repay me the full amount plus legal fees. A strict deadline was set, meaning she couldn't drag this out for years. That was when the waterworks started. She broke down, claiming she couldn't afford it, that she didn't have that kind of money. But the judge wasn't moved. The ruling stood. The case was over. The fallout didn't stop there. I posted an update on Reddit, letting people know that justice had been served. The response was immediate. More support flooded in, more people calling Maya out for what she had done. Then, it hit her job. The scandal had already damaged her reputation at work, but now that people knew she had lost in court, it got worse. The whispers turned into direct avoidance. People didn't trust her. She wasn't getting invited to meetings. Her credibility was shot. And Daniel, he had officially moved on. Maya found out through mutual friends that he had started dating someone else, someone with no baggage, no lies hanging over her head. She tried calling him, but he ignored every attempt. Then, just like that, Maya went silent. No angry texts, no calls, no attempts to negotiate. And that was what made me suspicious. She wasn't the type to just accept consequences. If she was quiet, that meant she was planning something. Maya stayed quiet for weeks after the court ruling. No tantrums, no last-ditch apologies, nothing, just silence. That alone was suspicious. Then, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, someone who had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines. Maya had quit her job. She hadn't just lost the promotion. She had walked away entirely. She was planning to skip town. It made sense. She had no way of paying me back, and with her reputation in ruins, she probably thought disappearing would solve her problems. But I wasn't about to let her run from the consequences. I contacted my lawyer immediately. Since the debt was now court-ordered, we had options. Within days, a lien was filed against any assets she owned. Her bank accounts were flagged. She couldn't just pack up and leave without dealing with the financial mess she had created. That's when the fire sale started. Maya began selling off everything she owned: designer bags, high-end furniture, expensive electronics. She had spent years living in luxury, thinking the money would never run out. Now, she was scrambling to scrape together whatever she could. But it wasn't enough. She had burned through too much too fast, and no one was willing to lend her anything. Friends who had once partied with her in rooftop lounges were suddenly too busy to pick up her calls. No one wanted to be associated with her now that the truth was out. Then, our mother showed up at my door. Maya had gone to her, spinning some sob story about how I was ruining her life. According to her, I was being cruel by enforcing the repayment, as if I hadn't spent years struggling just to keep her afloat. Mom wasn't there to talk. She was there to demand that I drop everything. She called me heartless. She told me that family forgives, that Maya was suffering enough already. I told her the same thing I had told Maya. Family doesn't use each other as stepping stones. If she cared so much, she could help her. But that was the thing. Mom didn't want to help Maya financially. She wanted me to keep carrying the burden. When I refused, she gave up. After that, Maya's situation got worse. Her credit score tanked. She couldn't rent a decent place without a cosigner. No one wanted to hire her after everything that had come out. Employers talk, and word had spread fast in her industry. Then, the final email came. It was long, bitter, and full of blame. She accused me of destroying her, of being jealous, of taking pleasure in her downfall. There wasn't a single apology. Not once did she acknowledge what she had done to get here. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat back and let it sink in. For years, I had put Maya first. I had given up everything so she could have a future, and in return, she had treated me like I was disposable. Now, I was finally free. Maya hit rock bottom fast. With no job, no savings, and no one willing to bail her out, she had no choice but to take a retail job, the same kind of work I had done for years to support her. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People from our hometown started noticing. Old classmates, former friends, the ones who had once admired her success, were now watching her stand behind a cash register, scanning groceries. Some of them laughed about it. Others ignored her entirely. No one felt sorry for her. Meanwhile, I was finally building the life I had put on hold for so long. With the money I had recovered from the lawsuit, I started my own business. It wasn't anything flashy, just something small but meaningful. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, instead of worrying about someone else's future. I also secured a stable job, one that actually paid well and gave me room to grow. No more double shifts, no more exhaustion, no more scraping by while someone else thrived on my sacrifices. Then, Maya resurfaced. The email she sent was long and dramatic. She claimed she had changed, that she had reflected on everything and realized she had made mistakes. But it wasn't an apology, it was an excuse. She talked about stress, about how she had been overwhelmed, about how she had never meant to hurt me. There was no mention of paying me back, no acknowledgement of what she had actually done. I ignored it. Then, our mother tried one last time. She called, insisting that I had to help Maya. She had lost everything, she was struggling, she needed family now more than ever. She went on and on about how I was cruel for abandoning her when she was at her lowest. I told her the same thing I had before. If she cared so much, she could help Maya herself. That was the last time we spoke. For closure, I posted one final update on Reddit, letting everyone know how things had turned out. The support was overwhelming. People were still calling Maya out, still holding her accountable for what she had done. And then, I moved on completely. I cut ties with Maya and my mother for good. I got accepted into an educational program, finally taking the steps I had once sacrificed so Maya could go to college. It felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. I also met someone who genuinely supported my ambitions, who encouraged me to keep moving forward instead of dragging me down. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who actually cared. Maya, she became irrelevant. I heard through acquaintances that she was still struggling, still bouncing from one short-term job to another, still looking for someone to rescue her. But I didn't care anymore. For years, my entire life had revolved around her. Now, it was mine again, and this time, no one was going to take it from me. Months passed without a word from Maya, no calls, no emails, no desperate attempts to get my attention. I had finally moved on, focusing on my own life, my own goals, and my own success. Then, one morning, an email appeared in my inbox. Subject, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Maya wasn't reaching out because she wanted to make amends. She had burned through every option, and now she was circling back, hoping I would be the safety net she no longer had. I deleted it without reading. A few days later, my mother showed up at my doorstep unannounced. It was early, too early for casual visits. She stood there, her expression tight, like she was preparing for a fight she already knew she would lose. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was about to say. Maya was struggling. She was depressed. She had lost everything. She was at her breaking point. I let her talk. I let her say everything she had come to say, the same speech she had probably rehearsed in the mirror before getting in her car and driving over. Then she switched tactics. She talked about family, about how we had been through so much together, about how Maya had made mistakes but was still my sister. She said I had to forgive her, that it was time to put this all behind us. I told her no. She looked stunned, like she hadn't even considered the possibility that I wouldn't budge. Then came the final plea. She blamed me. She said that if I had just let things go, if I hadn't sued, if I hadn't ruined Maya's reputation, then Maya wouldn't be in this position. She called me selfish, cruel, unforgiving. I stood my ground. For years, I had put Maya first. I had given up everything, so she could have a future. She had thrown it all away, and now she was paying the price for her own choices. Mom left in silence. Days later, I heard through acquaintances that Maya had finally landed a job at a call center. It didn't last long. Within 2 months, she was fired for attitude issues. With nowhere else to turn, she tried reconnecting with old friends. It didn't work. The people who had once been in her corner had seen the truth. They knew she had done this to herself. Then, the GoFundMe happened. Someone sent me the link, and I almost laughed. There it was, a sob story about how her family had abandoned her, how she had lost everything, how she was trying to rebuild her life, but couldn't do it alone. She was asking for donations, claiming she just needed a little help to get back on her feet. The internet wasn't kind. People immediately recognized her from my viral Reddit post. The comment section was brutal. "This you? Didn't you scam your sister out of thousands? Maybe try paying back the money you stole first." Within hours, she shut the fundraiser down. That was the moment it really sank in. Maya had lost everything: her job, her reputation, her social standing. She had no support left, no one to manipulate, no way to claw her way back to the life she had once taken for granted. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. I stopped checking for updates on Maya's life. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next disaster, the next manipulation, or the next desperate attempt to drag me back in. I moved forward, focused on myself, and let her fade into the background where she belonged. Then, an unknown number called. I don't usually answer numbers I don't recognize, but something told me to pick up. The second I did, I heard the familiar, shaky voice. It was Maya. She had used our mom's phone to get through to me. She wasn't angry this time. She wasn't screaming or blaming me for everything that had happened. She was crying. She had nowhere to go. No job, no savings, no one left to turn to. She had burned every bridge. She begged me to help her, just for a little while. A place to stay. A little money, anything. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I asked one simple question. If you could go back in time, would you still refuse to pay me back? Silence. A long, painful silence. Then finally she answered. I don't know. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. She hadn't learned anything. She wasn't sorry. She didn't regret what she had done. She only regretted the consequences. I hung up. That was the moment I was truly done with her. But Maya wasn't done trying to escape the mess she had made. After I shut her down, she made one last attempt to reconnect with Daniel. Maybe she thought he'd take pity on her, or maybe she thought she could manipulate him into helping her. It didn't work. Daniel was engaged. He had moved on completely. He didn't even acknowledge her attempt to reach out. That's when our mother stepped in again. But this time, she wasn't demanding. She was pleading. She showed up one last time, exhausted, defeated. Maya had officially run out of places to go, and now, she was truly homeless. "She'll be on the streets if you don't help." I didn't hesitate. "If you care so much, you take her in." Mom didn't respond right away. She just stood there realizing that she didn't want to deal with Maya either. That was the last time we spoke. Later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mom had finally given up on Maya too. She refused to house her, refused to financially support her, and refused to get dragged down any further. With no one left to manipulate, Maya started couch hopping between distant relatives, never staying in one place for long. People got tired of her quickly. She had no job, no real plan, no ability to take responsibility for herself. Eventually, even they stopped answering her calls. Maya had finally lost everything. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Looking back, it's almost unbelievable how much I sacrificed for Maya. Years of struggle, working myself to exhaustion, thinking I was doing the right thing, believing that my sacrifices would mean something in the end. I wasn't just supporting her financially. I had given up my future, my dreams, my time, all for someone who had never planned to return the favor. It took losing everything for Maya to finally understand that actions have consequences. I don't regret suing her. I only regret not putting myself first sooner. Now, my life is mine again. I'm financially stable, the small business I started is thriving, growing faster than I expected. I've built something meaningful, something for me, not for anyone else. On top of that, I went back to school. The education I once sacrificed for Maya, I'm finally getting it, on my own terms. Maya, on the other hand, didn't bounce back. I heard through an old acquaintance that she's living in a rundown apartment with a few unreliable roommates, people just as lost as she is. She burned too many bridges, lost too many people's trust. Even our mother finally stopped fighting for her. At some point, she must have realized that no matter how many times she tried to guilt-trip others into helping, Maya was a lost cause. People from our old circle reached out to me, some just to check in, others to admit they had been wrong about Maya all along. Any sympathy she might have had was gone. No one saw her as a victim anymore. Meanwhile, I started volunteering at a charity that helps young adults from low-income backgrounds get into college. It felt full circle, helping people who actually wanted to succeed. Then, one day, Maya sent one final email. Subject, "I hope you're happy." That was it, just one bitter sentence. No apology, no admission of guilt. I deleted it without responding. For the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. No more obligations, no more guilt, no more being dragged down by toxic family dynamics. For the first time, my future was mine. To wrap things up, I posted one final update on Reddit, thanking everyone who had followed my story, the people who had supported me through it all. The top comment, "Maya fumbled the biggest bag of all time. Couldn't have said it better myself." I'm a 32-year-old woman, and for most of my marriage, I've been navigating an exhausting relationship with my husband's family, particularly his overbearing mother and two nosy sisters. It feels like a never-ending battle to assert my boundaries while also trying to maintain peace. And honestly, I'm at my wit's end. When I first married my husband, I thought his family's involvement in our lives was just enthusiasm. My husband, who's a kind and loving partner, assured me that his mom and sisters were just a little over the top but meant well. Over time, though, their behavior started to feel less like enthusiasm and more like control. My mother-in-law never misses an opportunity to undermine me, whether it's at family dinners, holiday gatherings, or even casual phone calls. My cooking isn't authentic enough, my career isn't stable, and apparently my fashion sense is questionable. And that's just the start. What makes it worse is that she completely disregards the concept of boundaries. Early in our marriage, I'd be startled by the sound of her knocking, always unannounced, at our front door. It didn't matter if it was Sunday morning or late at night, she acted as if she had the right to drop by whenever she wanted. And if I dared to mention that we needed a heads up before she came over, she'd laugh it off or say, "Oh, I'm family. I don't need an invitation." My sisters-in-law, on the other hand, are like her shadow. They back her up on everything, creating a united front that's impossible to penetrate. They're constantly gossiping in their family group chats, where I'm conveniently excluded, and sometimes I'll catch wind of what's being said through mutual friends. Spoiler alert, it's never anything nice. The incident that finally pushed me to start questioning everything happened recently. My husband and I went on a short vacation, a much-needed break from the chaos, and when we came back, I almost didn't recognize our living room. My mother-in-law had decided to surprise us by redecorating it. The furniture was rearranged, new curtains were hung, and she'd even painted an accent wall in a color I hated. She'd apparently roped my sisters-in-law into helping her, and they'd made a day out of it. When I confronted her, her response was as dismissive as ever. She said, "I was just trying to help. Your living room needed some personality." My husband tried to mediate, but instead of taking my side, he shrugged it off, saying she probably thought she was doing something nice. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't about the living room. It was about the complete disregard for our space and our autonomy. The fallout didn't stop there. My mother-in-law started spinning her version of the story to the rest of the family, painting me as ungrateful and controlling. Soon after, my sisters-in-law began posting cryptic messages on social media about toxic people and drama queens, which were clearly aimed at me. It was exhausting to see these little digs pop up on my feed, but I decided not to respond. I thought maybe if I ignored it, things would eventually settle down, but of course they didn't. Not long after the living room debacle, my mother-in-law invited herself over for dinner, and she didn't come alone. She brought two of her friends, people I'd never met, and announced that she thought we could all get to know each other. I was blindsided and scrambling to put together enough food while trying not to lose my cool. After dinner, I told her, firmly but politely, that we'd appreciate it if she gave us a heads up before visiting in the future. She smiled, nodded, and ignored me completely. The next week, she showed up unannounced again, this time with a pie she'd baked. When I reminded her of our conversation about calling ahead, she brushed it off, saying, "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a pie." My husband, ever the peacekeeper, tried to smooth things over, telling me she meant well and didn't understand why I was so upset. I started to feel like I was living in a parallel universe, where everyone else was fine with this madness, except for me. The lack of support from my husband was the hardest part. He'd tell me he understood my frustrations, but when push came to shove, he'd always side with his mom to keep the peace. It left me feeling isolated, like I was fighting this battle alone. Every attempt to set boundaries was met with resistance or outright defiance. I began to question whether our marriage could survive this dynamic. It's not that I didn't love my husband, I do, but his unwillingness to stand up to his family was eroding the trust and partnership we'd built. That's when I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to keep living like this, constantly on edge and waiting for the next intrusion or passive-aggressive comment. I started devising a plan to regain control of my home, my marriage, and my peace of mind. If my husband wasn't going to stand up for us, I would. This wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from the chaos his family had brought into it. And this time, I wasn't backing down. Update 1. But yeah, I sat my husband down one evening after work, determined to have a serious conversation. I laid everything out, how his mother and sisters were interfering in our lives, how exhausting it was to constantly fend off their overbearing behavior, and how it was starting to take a toll on our marriage. He listened, nodding occasionally, but when I pressed him about confronting his family, he hesitated. He mumbled something about not wanting to create unnecessary drama, but he eventually promised to talk to them. I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give him the chance to step up. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up at our house unannounced again. She was holding a tray of cookies and smiling like nothing had happened. When I opened the door, she cheerfully claimed she'd forgotten about the new rule to call ahead. I stood my ground and told her she couldn't come in without prior notice. Her expression shifted immediately, and she raised her voice, calling me disrespectful and saying I was keeping her son away from his family. I calmly repeated that she needed to call before visiting and shut the door. She didn't leave. Instead, she sat on the porch, muttering loudly about how ungrateful I was. When my husband came home that evening, he found her still sitting there. He looked annoyed, not at her, but at me. He told me I'd escalated the situation unnecessarily and that I should have just let her in. I was stunned. It was like everything we talked about a few days earlier had flown out the window. Feeling cornered, I started keeping a record of every interaction I had with his mother and sisters. I figured if it ever came down to it, I'd at least have proof of how far they were pushing things. Not long after, I found out through a mutual friend that my mother-in-law was planning a family meeting to address my behavior. I wasn't invited, of course. My husband didn't tell me about it either. I only found out when the friend mentioned it in passing. When I confronted him, he admitted he'd been invited but didn't see the harm in attending. He promised it was just a chance for everyone to clear the air. That didn't make me feel any better. After the meeting, his sisters started sending me snide texts, implying that the family had unanimously decided I was the problem. The next blow came when I overheard my husband on the phone with his mother. She casually mentioned a family dinner she was planning at our house. She hadn't asked me or even told me. She was just organizing it like it was her own home. When I brought it up with my husband, he shrugged it off and said it wasn't a big deal. He suggested we just go along with it to avoid more tension. That was the last straw. I called my mother-in-law directly and told her the dinner was canceled. She was furious, accusing me of trying to divide the family. She threatened to cut off contact with her son if I didn't stop being so controlling. The fallout from that confrontation was immediate. My husband came home from work visibly upset. He told me his mother had called him in tears, saying I was ruining their relationship. He looked genuinely disappointed and said I was being too rigid. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I simply told him that if he wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I'd have to take more drastic measures to protect my peace. He didn't say anything after that, but the tension in the house was palpable. I knew things were going to get worse before they got better, but I was done compromising my sanity for the sake of keeping the peace. Update 2. After the fallout from the canceled dinner, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I told my husband we needed to have a serious conversation. I didn't sugarcoat it. I gave him an ultimatum. Either he set clear boundaries with his mother and sisters, or I would have to consider more drastic measures, including separating. He looked shocked but agreed to have a meeting with his mother to address the situation. I made it clear I expected him to stand firm this time. A few days later, my husband invited his mother over to discuss boundaries. I stayed upstairs, not wanting to derail the conversation. I could hear her dismissive tone even through the walls. She brushed off his concerns, saying, "This is just how our family is. She's the one who needs to adjust." When my husband mentioned my frustration, she accused me of being too sensitive and claimed I was trying to isolate him from his family. After she left, my husband admitted he hadn't gotten through to her. I wasn't surprised but told him this was his chance to show me he was serious about supporting me. The next morning, I woke up to find my social media flooded with vague posts from my sisters-in-law. They wrote things like, "Some people really don't understand the value of family and sad to see selfishness tear people apart." Though they didn't name me directly, it was obvious who they were talking about. I decided to block my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law on every platform to avoid the drama. That didn't stop them, though. I started hearing from extended family members who had been contacted by my mother-in-law, urging them to talk sense into me. Some of them called or messaged, telling me I needed to be more understanding. My husband, overwhelmed by the escalating tension, began avoiding the topic altogether. Anytime I brought it up, he'd change the subject or tell me he didn't want to fight. It was clear I was on my own, so I started researching my legal options. I contacted a lawyer to understand my rights regarding the house, just in case things took a turn for the worse. Knowing I had a plan gave me a sense of control, even if it was just a small step. The situation came to a head one afternoon when I heard a strange noise outside. I looked out the window and saw my mother-in-law standing on the porch with a locksmith. She was trying to have the locks changed, claiming she had every right to enter her son's house whenever she wanted. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, she burst into tears, claiming I was treating her like a criminal. The locksmith quickly left, and the officers explained to her that she had no legal right to access our home without permission. She finally left, but not without making a scene. When my husband came home, he was livid. He accused me of overreacting and embarrassing his mother. I reminded him that she had crossed every possible line, but he didn't want to hear it. He said I should have called him first instead of involving the police. I told him I'd had enough, and that if he didn't start standing up for me, I would have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I decided to take a week off work to clear my head and come up with a plan. During that time, my sisters-in-law started sending passive-aggressive messages to my husband, calling me controlling and saying they didn't recognize him anymore. I ignored them, but I could tell their words were getting to him. He started spending more time at work, coming home late, and avoiding me altogether. While cleaning the house one day, I found a spare key hidden in a drawer. It didn't take long for me to realize what had been happening. My mother-in-law had been using this key to let herself into the house whenever she pleased. I confronted my husband, who admitted he'd given her the key a long time ago and never asked for it back. Furious, I changed all the locks that same day. I told him that if he wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I would. The next time my mother-in-law tried to show up unannounced, she found herself locked out. When she called my husband to complain, he told her there was nothing he could do about it. I could tell he was finally starting to understand how serious I was. I warned him that if things didn't change, separating might be the only way to protect my peace. For the first time, he didn't argue. Instead, he promised to figure out how to fix things. I wasn't holding my breath, but at least it was a start. Update 3. The situation escalated when my mother-in-law called a family lawyer. She claimed she had rights to her son's house, despite having no legal ownership or leasehold. The lawyer advised her that she had no standing, but the fact that she went that far spoke volumes about her intentions. I decided to protect myself further by officially securing ownership documents in my name. The process took a few weeks, but by the end, I had legal proof that our home was mine as much as my husband's. This step gave me a sense of control and security. The aftermath of that meeting was predictably dramatic. My sisters-in-law took to social media, accusing me of turning their brother against them. They posted cryptic messages about toxic spouses and lost siblings, which mutual acquaintances quickly picked up on. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law started calling relatives to spread lies about me, claiming I was manipulative and trying to isolate my husband from his family. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stay focused. To protect myself, I began compiling evidence of their harassment. I saved text messages, voicemails, and screenshots of social media posts. This wasn't just for my own peace of mind. It was insurance in case things escalated further. My husband, to his credit, started cutting back on visits with his family. He avoided their calls and skipped a few gatherings, which was a significant shift. It seemed he was finally starting to see how their behavior was affecting our marriage. But then, my mother-in-law pulled her most dramatic stunt yet. She staged an intervention at a family gathering we didn't attend, inviting mutual friends and distant relatives to air her grievances. She accused me of tearing the family apart, painting herself as the victim of my control issues. A few of the attendees later reached out to me, expressing concern and asking for my side of the story. I calmly explained the situation, providing evidence of her behavior. To my surprise, some of them sided with me, admitting they had noticed similar patterns in the past. The turning point came when my husband finally defended me publicly. At another family event, where his mother tried to air her grievances again, he shut her down. He told her that he supported me, and that her behavior was the real issue. It was the first time he had stood up to her in front of the family, and it shifted the power dynamic completely. His mother was furious, threatening to disown him unless he divorced me. He told her that if she couldn't respect our marriage, then he would have no choice but to distance himself from her. The fallout was immediate. My mother-in-law stopped speaking to my husband, and my sisters-in-law followed her lead. It was a temporary estrangement, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. My husband's decision to prioritize our marriage over his family was a turning point, and while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I finally felt like we were taking control of our lives. Update 4. The rift in the family became undeniable after my husband stood up for me. My mother-in-law refused to attend any family events if I was present, making it clear she wanted no part of my life. This caused a divide in the extended family. Some supported her stance, while others stayed neutral or quietly sided with us. My sisters-in-law tried to mediate by suggesting compromises, but their efforts only worsened the situation. They constantly sided with their mother, insisting I should apologize and make things right. Despite the tension, my husband and I began attending events without my mother-in-law. For the first time, we enjoyed a sense of freedom at family gatherings. Without her overshadowing everything, I had the chance to bond with a few extended family members. They admired my strength and even shared stories of how controlling my mother-in-law had been in the past. Their support was a welcome surprise and made the gatherings more enjoyable. A few weeks later, my husband and I received a letter from my mother-in-law. She apologized for her behavior but didn't take responsibility for anything specific. It was more of a sorry if you were offended letter than a genuine apology. My husband thought it was a step forward and wanted to meet her to discuss reconciliation. I wasn't as convinced but agreed to a meeting, cautiously hopeful that things might improve. The meeting started on a civil note but quickly turned tense. My mother-in-law apologized again, but it was clear she didn't fully grasp the boundaries we had set. She made offhand comments about how she was only trying to help and didn't understand why I took everything so personally. I reiterated our rules for future interactions: no unannounced visits, no meddling in our decisions, and no undermining me in public or private. I also made it clear that any overstepping would have consequences. She nodded along but looked irritated. as if she was agreeing just to end the conversation. My sisters-in-law, meanwhile, were begrudgingly following suit. They stopped posting cryptic messages on social media but remained cold toward me. Their interactions were limited to polite exchanges, which I was fine with. I wasn't looking for a friendship with them, just respect. My husband, for his part, consistently enforced the boundaries we had set. Whenever his family pushed back, he stood firm, proving that he was fully on my side. But my mother-in-law wasn't done testing us. One evening, she showed up uninvited, claiming she just wanted to drop something off. My husband intercepted her at the door and firmly told her she couldn't come in without prior notice. She tried to argue, but he didn't budge. Eventually, she left, clearly upset, but it was a turning point. For the first time, she realized that the rules applied to her, too, and that my husband wasn't going to let her walk all over us anymore. After that incident, things began to settle down. My husband and I finally felt a sense of peace in our lives. The constant drama had lessened, and we started to rebuild trust in our relationship. One evening, he thanked me for my patience and resilience throughout the ordeal. It felt like we were finally on the same team, and it was a relief to know that our hard work was paying off. To celebrate our newfound independence, we started planning a vacation, a trip just for the two of us. It was something we hadn't done in years, and the idea of escaping everything, even temporarily, felt liberating. Around the same time, we received another letter from my mother-in-law. This one was different. It was heartfelt, apologetic, and free of excuses. She admitted to overstepping and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. We decided to take things slow. Reconciliation was possible, but it would be on our terms. For now, we were focused on enjoying the peace we had worked so hard to achieve. Update 5. Looking back on everything we went through, it's hard to believe how far we've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it transformed our marriage in ways I never imagined. My mother-in-law and sisters-in-law, once constant sources of stress, are now distant but respectful. They've learned to respect the boundaries we set, and while our relationships may never be close, the peace we've gained is worth it. My husband has been my greatest supporter throughout this transformation. Once hesitant and afraid of confrontation, he's grown into someone who prioritizes our marriage above all else. He stands firm when it comes to boundaries and doesn't let his family's guilt-tripping tactics sway him anymore. It's a relief to know we're truly a team now, something that felt impossible not too long ago. A few months after the chaos settled, we got the happiest news: we were expecting our first child. This added a new layer to our dynamic with his family. Predictably, my mother-in-law reached out cautiously, expressing a desire to be part of her grandchild's life. I made it clear that her involvement would be on our terms. There would be no unannounced visits, no undermining my parenting decisions, and no drama. Surprisingly, she respected the rules. She's been careful not to overstep, and while I remain cautious, her effort hasn't gone unnoticed. My sisters-in-law have also started to rebuild their relationship with me, though it's been a slow process. We've had a few civil conversations at family gatherings, and while the trust isn't fully there yet, it feels like progress. Extended family members who once took my mother-in-law's side have also started to shift their support toward us. They've seen the effort I've made to keep the peace and have started recognizing the toxic patterns that were at play before. Through all of this, I realized how many people struggle with similar issues in their families. I started mentoring others in online forums and local support groups, sharing my experiences and the lessons I learned about setting boundaries and standing firm. It's been incredibly rewarding to help others navigate situations like mine, and it's given me a sense of purpose beyond just resolving my own family drama. My mother-in-law, to her credit, has shown consistent effort to mend her ways. She's far from perfect, but her behavior has improved significantly. We've reached a tentative truce, and while I'll always keep my guard up, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. One of the most satisfying steps in our journey was renovating our home. We turned it into a true sanctuary, a space that finally feels like ours. We updated the living room she once redecorated without permission, transforming it into a reflection of our style. Every time I walk through the door, I feel a sense of pride in how far we've come. One evening, as we were finishing the nursery for our baby, my husband turned to me and apologized. He admitted he should have stood up for me sooner and promised that he would never let anyone come between us again. It was a heartfelt moment, and though I had already forgiven him, hearing him say it meant the world. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I feel a deep sense of triumph and gratitude. Boundaries didn't just transform our marriage, they gave me back control over my life. It's a lesson I'll carry with me forever, and one I hope to pass on to our child. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours, and that's more than enough for me. validation. I had already won. I was never the dumb one. I was just smarter than all of them.